Uh, I'll tell you a little bit about what I do here. So when you understand the type of test that you take, why I'm giving you some of this advice. uh, we're going to first talk about the AP Bio, the AP Chem, and the AP Environmental Science. We'll do it in this order. I don't have Physics 2 and Physics 3, the mechanics or the electricity and magnetism questions up. Those are very rare AP exams that students don't always take, but the Physics 1 algebra-based test is pretty popular, so we'll go over that too. But majority of my students just call me Dr. B. I'm by trade a clinical physician, but I teach for e-learning. So quite a few subjects, as you guys can tell. I'm one of the master teachers, so I'll give you guys the master ideas about how questions are written and how you can structure different types of ideas for the test. So we'll start with the AP Bio test. This is, again, in the AP Sciences, one of the few tests. It's not the hardest test out there, but there is quite a bit of memorization that's involved. A lot of application, too. If you always look at the timing of your exams, now, it's not just for this test. This is true for across the sciences. You generally want to spend about 45 seconds. It's usually a minute, though. 45 seconds depends on the difficulty of the question. It could be easy, but a minute to minute and a half. Here, you'll see a minute and a half for the bio exam. That's for your MCQs, your multiple choice questions. For your free response questions, you get 6 of them, and you get 2 big, gigantic essay questions. Those you have to answer. Those are very time consuming sometimes, versus the 4 short essay answer questions. Now, in terms of the total number of questions, you'll see that even though you get 6, it's not like they tell you which timing breakdown you have per test and per essay. So what I recommend you do is, if this is something that throws you off, try to time and pace it per passage. That's something that's important. So the breakdown per exam for the requirement to get a 4 or 5, you can see the past year's percentages. Now, some of the easier tests in terms of like the curves and scaling and how it's graded, you'll see that to get a 5, it's technically a little easier, but that doesn't necessarily mean that more or less students took it. It could be the type of test it is. It could be an easier test. Maybe the questions weren't as rigorous as maybe other years. But again, this is why you have to do a bunch of practice exams and try to understand the content a little bit more thoroughly, because when you have an exam that's application based, which is what you guys are going to see a lot of this year, then you have to focus not just on, did I memorize the concept correctly? It's more about, did I memorize it? Can I apply it? And you guys will see this in the experimental discussion questions that we have today. So to get a 5, this is what we try to aim for to get that credit. You have to, we generally equate it to a grade of an A in school, but it depends on the school curriculum too. So prep courses, tutoring sessions, tutoring classes, courses like any that talk about the preparation of AP exams will really help you gain a higher score towards the 4 or 5. A lot of colleges accept the 4 or 5. Some colleges don't even look at a 3, 2, or 1, but again, depends. I've seen some colleges look at the 3, but it again depends on the program. Now, these are the current topics that are asked on the bio exam. I'm not going to go through each one in depth. You guys can, of course, at some point read through this. This is a recorded lecture, so at some point, if you're concerned about the specific topics, you can always look at that. But what I want to discuss is the percentage breakdown and how to tackle some of these questions. Again, strategy sessions like this will be useful to review. Let's say, for example, if you get a question in cell structure and function, what's the type of question that you get? So these are the percentage breakdowns. I like to include it. You can always view through these of the different topics that you'll see. So for example, in bio, chemistry of life, 8 to 10%. A question that I get often is, if you get 8 to 10%, how do you know which side it's on? Is it the 8% or is it the 10%? That's the practice you're going to have to do. If you do enough practice with this, you won't have to worry about those types of situations. You then can expect that percentage. Okay. So in terms of the applied knowledge, so now this is something where I was telling you about content knowledge. This is for bio, of course, but it's just applied to across the board for your sciences. So for your content knowledge compared to tests that ask you about knowledge during scientific inquiry. So basically, this is like where if you've done lab work or in your some of your AP sciences, you should be doing labs, but it again depends on the programs. Some programs, especially during the pandemic time, it was hard to do lab work. So College Board caught on to this, and they didn't include much during the pandemic years. But now they still include it, because you got to remember, AP exams are your 1 year's worth of college credits. You're technically taking that class in high school to get credit, hopefully, for your undergrad coursework, so you don't have to take that class, or you can substitute for another course. So in your college, let's say bio course or physics course, you're going to be doing labs. So we try to incorporate that into AP exams. So concept explanation questions. These are the ones where you'll see 25, 33% combination concepts. So these are like processes, concepts, models, different types of formats that you see within the questions. They'll give you figures. Sometimes you have to analyze the figure. You'll see the next part, visual representations, 16 to 24%, questions and methods. So if you understand the percentage breakdowns, I won't go over each one, but you guys can see this at some point. If you're taking this specific test, these are very content specific topics for this specific exam. I would rather go through the structure. So check it out. This is your FRQ. You get 2 of the long essay questions. And again, this is the part where it depends. Some questions can be worth 2 points, other questions can be worth 1. Depends on the part of the question and really the rigor of the question. So your first question for an FRQ in bio will be structured around part A, B, C, and D. So interpreting and evaluating experimental results, 8 to 10 points. The problem that happens here is if you miss part A, this is not always a situation that occurs, and I don't want this to happen to you, but if it does, we've discussed it. If you miss part A, you have the potential to miss part B, and then part C, and then part D, and that's not what we want. If you've ever been on a roller coaster ride, we call that a negative roller coaster event. So a roller coaster of negative events, you're going downward. We don't want that. We want you to go upward towards the 5. So be very careful when you answer part A questions. This is true across the board for all your tests. Because if you're not careful with this, what will occur is you'll take your test and you'll just assume that all the questions are worth the same. They're not point value wise. So that's important to note for specifically bio. The second question, you'll see experimental design and experimental results, but with graphing. At some point, I'll show you why graphing is so important. You got to really structure yourself around how the graphing works. So your X and Y axis, define it, your units, mark down your key, mark down your variables that you have. Your third question will be scientific investigation. This will provide a lot of proof on the scenario for, you'll see biological concepts or processes. The issue with this is scientific investigation, a lot of you guys do in school. It's like your scientific method. But the problem with the scientific method is that not everyone always understands why you're producing some sort of like hypothesis theory. I mean, this is your experimental design. The issue is this is not your design technically. It's the design that the question gave you. So you have to put yourself in the realistic perspective of the scientist. So even though you're predicting the results and justifying predictions, you're still based on some sort of scientific investigation they mentioned. So provided with a lab investigation scenario. So this is what I mean. Labs are very important for your exams. Conceptual analysis questions, you'll have, these are the disruption questions. So they disrupt a lot of your thought processes. Students don't like these generally because the disruption is some random, maybe some random questions that they're not used to seeing. It could be talking about some sort of genetic condition, or dominant recessive diseases, and all of a sudden it'll throw in the name of a dominant or recessive disease and ask you to interpret that disease onset or how the disease is dominant or recessive, or if it's something that's it can get even harder. They can even give you a pedigree chart. So those are different kinds of questions. The fifth question you'll get is model and visualization questions. Analyzing data. I think you guys get the idea in bio. But let me talk about a general approach here you want to do across a couple of your sciences. We'll focus on this particular section first because in chemistry you have the 2-system pass. In bio you have the 3-system pass. So when you're working through questions, let me go through this first and then I'll go through the questions itself. Pace yourself. If you're taking your test and you don't know a question, guess. Don't leave questions blank. This was a question that showed up in our last lecture. Should we actually work on questions and should we leave them blank? Don't leave anything blank. We don't want you to make careless errors, but believe it or not, aggressive guessing is actually quite useful across the board of all your AP exams. So slowing down and doing the questions, answering in the best way that you think you can do well, and staying focused on the question at hand is very useful. If you're rushing through the questions to get it done, so like this is what I tell all my AP bio students, chemistry students, my environmental science students. The physics C exam is hard, but the physics 1 students. If you're taking the test and you don't know something, guess. Don't sit and stare at it, because if you're going to sit and stare at it, you're actually wasting more time by taking points away from other questions. You're not thinking about the other questions then. You're thinking about that one question itself. So If you're rushing to take the test, to take the exam, that's it. There's the issue. You're rushing to get something done. I'm not saying procrastinate on this, of course, but make sure that if you do answer something, you know it. So that's why the 3-system pass is useful. This is, again, true across the board for a lot of your AP sciences. This is like the now, later, and last situation. So for your multiple choice questions, you can consider this as easy, medium, and difficult, perhaps. I had a student that actually asked this, I forgot to mention last year, where they were like first, second, third. I don't like mentioning first, second, third mainly, but if it helps you guys to, those of you that are analytical thinkers, like to think in numbers, if you say first, second, third, that could help you too. Like the first question you want to do, second and third one. But I don't like that idea. I like to think of it as now, later, and last, or easy, medium, difficult, because that's really the grouping of the questions. So always do the questions you find easiest for you first. There's no reason to do the hardest questions first. I'm not sure why you would want to do that. I mean, in schoolwork, I get it. You want to do the hard stuff, get it done out of the way. The easier stuff makes it easier. I get that. But if all points are worth the same, why are you spending your time getting the hard ones wrong? You don't want to do that. Get the easy ones right. Get your points where you can. So bubble as you go. Every year I have students that mess up this. They'll like mess up question 41 or something, or 42 or 43. It happened last year, the year before that. If you're bubbling in your Scantron, and let's say you do all your questions and then go back, you have like a minute left, and you start bubbling it in, and it's only a minute, you got to do all 60 of these questions within that minute. That's a second per bubble. It's really stressful. Don't do that. Do it as you go. If there's a question you don't know, mark it down. It's easy, medium, difficult. So this now, later, and last scenario is basically like where if you see a question now, do it right now. You got your points. If you see a question that you're not 100% sure of, it's like the 50-50 scenario, do it later or last. That's down. Then you have the situation where the last questions, or the ones that are like the super, super most difficult ones, definitely guess on those, move on from that. So that should help you with your pacing. Now, I wanted everyone to see that because I'm going to give you guys the different question types. Just the question types, just to brush up on this. And then we will talk about the chem exam. So concept explanation questions. Before you do anything in a lot of your science concepts, try to read that last question first. In a question like this, they're talking about DNA fragments and positive and negative poles, or positive poles. I'm assuming negative poles might be mentioned at some point. So this is probably the gel electrophoresis lab, or the gel electrophoresis subject matter when they talked about DNA and RNA bonds, perhaps, or DNA fragmentation. So you'd have to either think of the unit or think of the type of question it is. Usually I tell my students that sometimes thinking about which unit it is could be confusing because then you're compartmentalizing the units. Rather focus on the question type. This is a concept explanation question. Strictly background knowledge will help. Take a look at the next one. Visual representation. This is what I was talking about in terms of pedigree. We're talking about Marfan syndrome. If you've never heard of this disease before, it could throw you off in the question. This is something that can be very tricky sometimes. But this Marfan syndrome is not something that you study in school. So some students don't. Some students do. This is actually a medical disease onset genetic disorder, autoimmune disease that can occur over time in certain inheritance patterns. You'll see it's present in every generation. But anyways, that's a side note. I call those Jeopardy facts in my classes. So if you learn this analysis of the question type, visual representations of pedigree, you can then expect that on the exam. The argumentative and augmentation questions, these are the ones where you have different theories. So you'll notice this question is asking about bats. And we're talking about different types of species within, it says species 1 and species A and species B, and you might have to compare those species, kind of like a dueling passage, or dueling authors, or dueling scientists. You're comparative scientists sometimes. Sometimes they'll agree, sometimes they won't. Sometimes you're using evidence. You'll see principles and theories of the evidence. Now, these questions exist everywhere. These are the set-based questions, or I call them linked questions, perhaps. You don't know that 4 is required for 5 or 6. You have no idea. So in these kinds of situations, I didn't tell you guys this, but just to reiterate, always read that last question first for these kinds of wordy questions. For this situation, don't read the whole thing. Not yet. Go to the questions. Read question 4. Question 4 is a questions and methods question. So these specific types of sets, if you mess up question 4, you can mess up 5 or 6, potentially. There's no guarantee that will happen, and I hope it doesn't happen. But you don't want to cause that as a, like when I say there's no guarantee, you don't want to guarantee your loss in the questions, guys. So get 4, 5, and 6 right. So in order for that to be true, you pay a little careful attention to what 4 is. See if 4 is required for 5 or 6, and if not, then you're good. So go to question 4. Question 4 is a questions and methods question. This is asking about experiment. Question 5 is asking about different types of data and how data exists, the tables and data between the variables. Question 6 is asking about data analysis and a calculation. Calculations exist on bio exams, but they're usually pretty straightforward. They don't require too much crazy mental math. It's different on AP Chem tests and physics exams. You will definitely need to do some calculations and show all your work. For any of the FRQs that you do, always show every step. So after you read all your questions, go back and start reading this whole question set, and that'll make it useful for you, because then you can decipher through what is important in the text and what's important in the data. You don't always need to read through everything. That's a great question. I'll let Anna or Stephen answer that. We have a question in the Q&A about if this is going to be posted anywhere else. I think it is. It is recorded, so yes.
Yes, so these recordings will be available both on YouTube and emailed to you since you registered after this session. So you'll be able to review all of this information at your convenience.
Thank you, Anna. There's your answer. I didn't want to misanswer the question there, but I'm pretty certain yes. If you need it, I can email also the PDF lectures that I have. I can email that to our office. Great question though. Okay. So now question 7, I just want to show everyone how process elimination is used. This is something we'll use in bio, but you can do this for every question set. I just want everyone to see the principle of theory. How do I use PO? So PO is a great way to simplify answer choices that give you a hard time. Look at the question. Even if you didn't know much about the biological idea of the question, at least you can understand what the question is asking to some degree. It's asking about gas exchange. Which of the following best explains how gas is exchanged in a woody stem? I mean, I have students that freak out because they don't know what woody stem is, but don't freak out yet. You don't even know what the question is besides the question itself. We haven't read the problem yet. So trees and shrubs have hard woody stems and grow buds that persist above the ground throughout colder months. Okay. Might not tell you much. But then look at your answer choices. C and D are impossible. C talks about hormones and neurotransmitters. D talks about lentil beans. Totally random. And they do that on the test. Pick your high yield answers. Guess what we just did? We eliminate C and D, you're down to 50% chance, A and B, of getting it right. That's process elimination. You can do that on every test for your MCQs. You should do that to eliminate any sense of careless errors. This is why aggressive guessing is very useful. Guess as you go. Word associations is useful across the board too. Word associations are kind of like where you use keywords or key facts, use acronyms to your advantage. So like we have one here. For example, these are the mnemonics. Dumb King Philip came over from Germany soaked. So this is domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. This is an acronym. But you're not memorizing the acronym just to know it. You're memorizing it to know the classes of species or your class systems. So if you understand that, then you can relate that to some of your word associations. Take a look at this question. Word associations work like this, guys. Cytokinesis is all of a sudden showing up. So if you didn't know what anything else in the question was, if you see cytokinesis, you can start thinking like, okay, this is cell division. Things are starting to fall apart. Cellulose seems like it's plants. This is what we just did. We deciphered through the topic and got an idea of the word association involved. Again, you can do this for every question. For every subject that you want to attempt for AP Sciences. Now, last thing I want to say is the except not least questions. Again, this applies in AP Bio, but also in majority of your tests. The only test that I would be a little bit more wary of is the mechanics exam for physics. They don't really do this so much. They do have it, but not as often as they do in some of the other subjects. So except not least questions, you're trying to find the wrong answer. I always tell my students, take out the word except. Pretend like it's not even there. If you want to, put your thumb over the screen, pretend like the except word is gone. That's what I always tell my students. All the following are true statements about gametes. Okay, cool. Forget the word except is there. Find the one that's true. So the true answer choices are right. Everything else is technically wrong, right? So there should be 3 true answers here, and the false answer is the right answer. That's how this works. So the best answer is a version of the answer that's technically supposed to be wrong in any other scenario, except for the question. So these questions are kind of hard to do. So if you're able to do this efficiently, it'll help you through all your question types. Now, what I want to show you guys is the graphing component here. So in order to label your graphs on FRQs is across the board, label your axes, independent, dependent variable for bio, show your trends, mark your units, mark the actual title, if you have a key of some sort, mark it down. Graders aren't going to go looking for things that you didn't mention. We're just going to go find things that are being mentioned by students. We take it at face value. When I say at face value, if you tell me that a control group is a variable group, I'm going to assume that that's what you mean. But if you're telling me a control group is something that cannot be changed, it's the standard of a comparison, and then you can compare the variables. Now notice the explanation gives better rise to the accuracy of everything. Very useful. So you can do this for some of your FRQs. Now we'll jump into chem. I apologize for going starkly from one subject to the other, but since we're doing AP Sciences, it's better to do it like this. It's kind of like ripping off the Band-Aid. We're just basically doing that, going from AP Bio to AP Science, AP Chemistry, but the idea will be basically the same. So check it out. For the AP Chemistry test, you have so if you have any questions on AP Bio, feel free to ask, since that subject is reviewed. But it's a very big generalization of the subject. But hopefully you guys got a good idea of strategy, especially for MCQs, FRQs, what to do. Pay attention to your parts. For chemistry, the first section is 90 minutes. Then you have 60-minute multiple choice questions. The second section is 105 minutes, and you have 3 long essays and 4 short essays. Timing wise, it is hard because chemistry is one of the harder AP exams out there. I'm not saying the hardest, but one of the harder AP exams out there. Look at the scores. It's harder to get a 5 and a 4 compared to 3 2s and 1s. A lot of students, majority of students do get 3, 2, and 1. It seems like majority of students last year got a 2. I know last year's exam was hard. It's application based. That's why I'm warning all my students this year. If you're taking an application-based test, be prepared. This is what you got to look out for. The concept and understanding how to apply it in experimental situations or in visual representation questions. So look at your units. The major units are units 3 and 8 that they test you a lot on, but that does not mean that they can't test you on anything else. If you think about it, if I take out units 3 and unit 8, everything else is 7 to 9%. Now, again, a question I get asked is, which side is it on? Is it more on the 7% or on the 9% side? Question is review AP Bio done in the webinar? I would love to do more bio review. It's a great question, but I have to do the AP Sciences for all the subjects. But that's a great question. We might be, I don't know, but I can ask the office to see if they can maybe schedule an AP Bio review. I've done some AP Bio. I call them super bio reviews. But we have cram courses for that. I can have one of. So Anna, Stephen, I don't know if you guys have an answer to this.
Yeah, so we have a mix of students here from different districts all across the US. And so for those of you who are coming from a little bit of everywhere and looking for more help, either in AP Bio or any other subject, you can go to Tutor.com, which we'll get into shortly. And that is a resource that is available for you 24/7 that you can access for any of your subject review leading up to the exam.
Perfect. Thank you for your answer. Yeah, I think that's a great. The recording, I think, will be posted on the YouTube video at some point, or it could be sent to you. But yeah, I would love to do AP Bio review. We have specific lectures for that, programs for that. So that's a great question. But for the chemistry concept, take a look, guys. If I take everything out, unit 3 and unit 8, it's 7 to 9% for everything. But I don't know if it's the 9% side or the 7% side. This is where you got to take your practice test to really determine this. So in terms of multiple choice questions, watch the key difference. Some of the more competitive students, now when I say competitive, they like want to major in chemistry, they want to be a chemical engineer. Like, we all have different majors we want to attain. So it really depends on the rigor, again, what you want to do. But some of my more technical students, they like to use a 3-pass system for chemistry. Now hear me out. I know it says 2-pass. So it's just like, wait, it says 2-pass here though. What are you talking about 3-pass here? So AP Bio students that have taken AP chemistry exams, or vice versa, because you guys know that if you're an AP Sciences student, you don't always take just one AP Science. You take more than one sometimes. There's limitations though. Some schools only offer a certain number of AP exams. What's ironic in all this is that, like, I have a student right now that's taking literally 7 APs. I didn't even know that was allowed. I was like, how are you taking the 7th one? He has to go to another college to take it. That's a lot of AP exams. You must get all that college credit. So taking those multiple AP tests and you get that college credit will allow you to then maybe take another course or another program that you want to do in your undergrad years. But these little systems and approaches that you're learning, you could probably apply this actually for your undergrad years too. That's kind of nice. for any of your undergrad work at some point, the 3-system pass, two-system pass. I've had students that have told me throughout the years that they've used this ideology on other exams. So get this, for the 2-system pass, it's kind of like now or last. It's like either you got it or you didn't. It's kind of easy to do that on this type of test for chemistry, because for chemistry concepts, a lot of the times either you know or you don't. But there are some questions that do give you a little bit of a hard time sometimes, where it's kind of like, well, I kind of knew this. I should have done this one. Should I come back to it? That sounds to me like a later question. That doesn't sound to me like an now or last. So some of the more technical students, what they'll do is they'll use the 3-pass system as a conversion system from bio. So they'll do first, second, third, like some analytical students, or easy, medium, difficult, or now, later, or last. You can do that. But let's say you're like, you know what, I don't want to do all that in chemistry. I feel like that's going to be harder for me. That's totally fine too. You can use a 2-system pass. 90% of my students use the 2-system pass. It's quite effective. But what you have to keep in mind is it's based on your level of comfortability. You're going to get a lot of calculations here. So be comfortable with this. PO will be huge for the chem test. See, our natural occurrence is our brains are naturally, this is how human nature is well, what we teach sometimes in the evolution section in AP biology if you get time. But our minds sometimes are in tune to get a task done. We want to get it done. But sometimes we want to get it done to the point where we're actually hurting the other questions, right? If you're spending so much time on one question, you're not utilizing PO, cross elimination. You're not utilizing what I call letter of the day. Letter of the day, LOTD, is basically where you pick a letter that you want to pick for any question you don't know and stick with it all the way throughout your test. So let's say there's a question that I come across that I have no idea. Cool, pick B, move on. Pick C, move on. It's very effective for your work. And if you keep that consistent, what will happen is you won't fear guessing. You'll feel more comfortable with the exam, and your pacing will improve. See, accuracy is one thing and pacing is another. Students try to combine one and the same. They're not one and the same. If you're not accurate, think about it like this. If you're not accurate on your exam, who cares about your pacing? Seriously. You could fly through the whole test and get everything done, but still miss 50% of everything. Don't do that. Use the strategies that you're learning to your advantage. So on chem tests, the free response questions, we gotta approach these a little bit differently. See, College Board will say 22 minutes for this, for your long essay questions. You remember, you got 3 of them. They're about 10 points. This is an average. This was from last year. Now it's more like 18 to 24. I'll tell you why it's so broad. Some of your questions require 24 minutes. I mean, there's some calculation questions, like they'll give you parts A through E, and then E will have 3 subpoints. It'll be like EI, EII, and then EIII. Literally, just like that. And it's confusing. If you're wondering, like, whoa, what did you just say? That sounded really confusing. That's what they do on the exam. They confuse you with the letters so that when it comes to answering these questions, instead of spending the 22, you're spending like 24 to 28. You got to watch your pacing for this. But again, practice will help you. So in order to avoid any sort of like discrepancy on your exam, show every step. Every step of your calculation should be there. Even if you mess up, draw a little line through it. Seriously. A little line through it will help a lot. I know that sometimes, like for example, let's say I didn't know this. My straight line is not a straight line today, huh? Just gonna draw a line through that calculation, perhaps. Maybe because I didn't like it. It's not useful. And then if let's say I want to show a calculation to my grader and I messed up my stoichiometry. Put a little line through it. Don't do this. This is hard to follow. So if you can maintain this and you can show proper etiquette on your test, you write neatly, you remember your sig figs. And most importantly, by the way, when I say sig figs, your graders, now I don't mean this in a mean way at all, but your graders have no mercy when it comes to sig figs for CAT. That is not an excuse. If you try that with any of your chemistry teachers for AP, they'll be like, tough luck. It's because in chemistry exams, and think about if you're a chemistry student, there's a big difference between getting 1 gram of a substance versus 10 grams of a substance, right? If you're doing chemical reactions, let's say you're doing combustion reactions, where you're combining combustion reactions, or by the way, you should be in controlled environment, right? These are like fires, for example. Like a fire is a combustion reaction. If you allow oxygen into a closed room, that whole room now just has fresh oxygen. The fire has fresh fuel. Things might blow up there. You don't want that. So if that happens, then you have not done your experiment correctly, right? So my point in all of this is, let's say you're trying to explain a combustion reaction, you're trying to write it down or trying to explain it to a grader. If you write your chemical equation wrong, and let's say your gram total is wrong, your significant figures are wrong, there's a big difference between getting 1 gram of something versus 10 grams of something. So sig figs, majority of the times when students lose points for anything, really, like every step could be right. Sig figs, watch out for this. For this year's test, it's a big deal. We'll still follow your reasoning, but if you made a mistake on the test and you made a mistake, let's say again, writing something out, just make sure that you write down a key term then. Let's say you don't know something in the question. Fine, write down a key term. You'll be surprised the number of times it actually gets you points. And make sure you take it step by step. Again, like I said earlier, write neatly. So I hope this gives you an idea of the two sciences that we just discussed, bio and chem. I'm going to hand this off to Anna or Steven, whoever would like to present for this. And then I'll pick up the environmental science and we'll talk about the physics exam.
Perfect. Thank you, Samit. I really appreciate that. And students, thank you so much for attending today's session. Really appreciate your attendance and definitely want to share some information with you about Tutor.com. This can really help you prep for your AP testing. Remember, Tutor.com is available for you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there's a lot of great AP testing resources there available for you. You connect through your school's learning management system. One thing I do want to inform you, not only do you have access to a lot of AP courses, but remember math and science, and there's some great writing support as well for you. Remember, Tutor.com is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it is free. Tutors will also help you with your classroom assignments. So it's not just about prepping for a test, but really get some homework help from our tutors. Remember our essay review feedback form. It's a great writing resource where you can drop off a rough draft of an essay or even a resume and actually receive, writing support within 12 hours. Remember, provide post-session feedback. That really helps us. We want, when you visit Tutor.com, to be a user-friendly experience and something that you get a lot out of as well when you visit the platform. Next slide, Sumi. Remember, when you land at Tutor.com, this is what you will see. And we do want you to answer a few questions. You do have the opportunity to conduct a session in either English or Spanish. We do want you to select your topic and subject that you would like to engage with one of our tutors in. You have the opportunity to conduct a session in chat only or in chat and voice. One great thing as well is we want you to enter a question. You can attach a file, share actually some homework problems with our tutors, click connect now, and your wait time will be no longer than 1 minute. Next slide, Sami. This is our writing review, essay drop-off writing review resource that's available for you. It's available for grades 7 through 12. Remember, you can drop off a rough draft of an essay that you're working on, actually receive some feedback within 12 hours or less. It's a detailed rubric summary feedback form that you will receive, but you can also even access your original rough draft and actually view tutors' comments on your rough draft. So please, students, you have the opportunity to access live support while you're prepping for your AP testing with one of our tutors at Tutor.com, but also remember as well, there's some great writing support available for you at the platform as well. Thank you, students, again for attending today's session. Back to you, Samit.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Stephen. Excellent. Guys, we have a lot of resources, and I'm not saying this for any other reason. I've been teaching for about 16 years, test prep, just the guidance of exams, coaching students for the exams. Websites like this did not exist when I was going through prep. And I always say this in a joking way, but I'm kind of serious. I'm kind of jealous that you guys get this because I wish I had it. It would have made my studying a whole lot easier. But at least now you guys have that resource. Use it. When I first started teaching, there was no website, guys. That's how long that this subject matter has stayed the same. The content has always been the same. It's the type of test that you're taking that could change potentially. So let's jump into the environmental science discussion. So now, I don't mean this in a disrespectful way at all, but the environmental science section tests that you have are the easiest of all your AP Sciences. If you're trying to get a 5, take this test, because this test you need less studying than other exams. That's not to say that it's the easiest test out there. It's not to poke fun at the difficulty of the AP Environmental Science. But if you compare the Environmental Science test to, let's say, the Physics C Mechanics exam, there's a night and day difference between the difficulty of the test. So what a lot of students will do is they'll try to aim for these easier AP exams to get their college credit. It's a smart move to do. So like for example, the AP Environmental exam, you'll have 80 multiple choice questions, 60% of your score, about an hour and a half, 90 minutes. You have about 70 minutes in total time for your FRQs, and you'll notice it's 3 questions, 40% of your score. Here's the major issue though. For an FRQ, if you mess up on, let's say, a little bit of the exam, like like one of your questions, you're doomed a little bit because it messes you up for the rest of the test. Really, it does. You got to be careful with this. The first type of question that you'll answer in FRQs are design and analyzing investigation concepts. So these are like experiments where they'll talk about maybe the environmental, they'll mention like the ecosystem, and then they'll ask what's changing in the ecosystem and why. You'll analyze environmental issue and propose a solution. Maybe in the ecosystem, there's like, usually College Board, when I say rarely, if not ever, they won't ever do, I haven't seen it like on a real test. It does pop up on practice exams. Mention controversial topics. So you're not going to talk about like why there's increasing greenhouse emissions gases. That's controversial, guys. We don't discuss that. We're discussing the idea of why maybe photosynthesis might be causing like the mutations in photosynthesis, synthetic rates might be causing maybe some sort of issues with the ecosystem. You can't mention controversiality. Controversiality will disprove you as a student, because then as a grader on my end, I'm going to be like, well, which side are you picking? This is not about like the side. It's about the science behind it. So be careful of this, especially with this specific topic. In students, when they propose a solution too, and you have to calculate things, remember, these are all based on scientific principles. So I'll give you guys an example here. We've already talked about set-based questions. These are these face value questions. Notice in the environmental science, they don't really give you a lot of information sometimes. It's literally just a figure. And they mess with a lot of students by saying a diagram not drawn to scale. So there's a saying for this. Believe what you, whenever you're reading this, believe what you read, not what you see sometimes. Because what you see sometimes might not equate to the distances. Here we see 500 kilometers. And then it says 80 to 500 kilometers. But if you look at it carefully, if this is 500 distance-wise, let me show you from here to here. This doesn't seem like it's equal. But that's not your job. Your job is to analyze the type of atmospheric pressure or the type of atmospheric variations that you have here. So denote what you actually are doing in the questions. Otherwise, you're not even in the right section. So look at the first question. It's talking about Earth's daily weather. Second question is talking about the highest layer and the infrared radiation that you might need. The third question is discussing the approximate distance. Looks like a calculation. Now, of course, for the MCQs, you don't have to show your steps, because for the MCQs, steps aren't necessary, because it's you only. Well, you have to show your steps, of course, for yourself, but it's not necessary to show to anyone else. I mean, College Board really wants to know your bubbled answer here. So be careful of these set-based questions. If you miss one, you might miss the other, but that's why, again, you want to avoid those careless errors. Practice. The individual questions. So we just went over the set-based questions. We're going to go over the individual questions now. So for the individual questions, check it out. It's talking about some sort of disruption, and it's a question that you might not maybe be comfortable with. If it's not one you're comfortable with, remember the 3-pass system we talked about in bio. In chemistry, we talked about 2-pass system. Now you can apply that same idea here also in the environmental science test. So if you feel very confident with the work, use the 3-pass system. The now, later, and last. Easy, medium, difficult. If you're analytically thinking about it, first, second, third. But if you're feeling like, I don't really know, I think I'm okay with this, maybe I need like 2 more practice tests, start with the now and last. The ones that you know for sure you can do now, and ones that maybe give you a hard time. The ones that are in the middle, you know they exist, but work with them as you go. So the 3-pass system and 2-pass system really is effective for many students on AP Sciences. A lot of the free response questions are going to ask you about interdisciplinary studies. You'll have to design an experiment. You have to analyze and problem, work through calculations. Here's an example of one. For this, don't read just this last sentence. It's the whole problem. So according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and consumption of natural gas in the U.S. increases 8% per year. Now, this is something annoying that they do on environmental exams that they don't do on other tests. They like to write out percent. They like to write out their units sometimes. And I have many students that ask, well, it's kind of annoying. I'm like, it is annoying. It's not kind of annoying. It is annoying because technically we don't write out percent, guys. When you're writing out percent in math, unless I could be wrong, but from my understanding, the years that I've taught this, students usually use a symbol. So they do this to throw you off because it's more wording. Don't let stuff like that throw you off. I know it's a little silly to discuss, but it is accurate for the exam. The United States receives its supplies of gas from a variety of international domestic locations. Natural gas is used in the home for industry and for power generation. They ask you to calculate, describe, and explain. This is an example of an FRQ that you got to be very careful of, because again, if you're calculating something in the first question, you need that calculation maybe for the second and third one, maybe not for the fourth one, you don't know. You might mess up. So always pay attention to your questions and avoid those careless errors. See, this is what I was telling you about the difficulty. Check it out. A lot of students get 4s, quite a few. I mean, by the way, this is a typo. My apologies. You should say 2021. But the 7% is not something that don't let this scare you away. Not a lot of students take the environmental science test. Some students don't even know that it existed as a test. It's there. Now, in terms of your percentage breakdown, you guys already know 80 multiple choice questions, 60%, 3 FRQs, 40%. So make sure you use process elimination, fill in your bubbles, and you should be good. The point scale is usually from 0 to 10, so you get like 30 points in total for your FRQs for environmental science. These are your units. Make sure you pay attention to these units. Usually the unit that teachers have trouble getting to, and I'm not blaming any teacher. I should always clarify this. If you're attempting to teach this subject, everyone that teaches AP knows this. It's hard to get through all your units with labs. Really, it's not like you're given a full year, all 365 days to teach the subject. We have vacations, we have summer time off, we have holidays, so it's different. So we have to combine all these units within a span of like 6 months sometimes, or 7 months, 8 months. So you have to give yourself credit. If you can't get to these units, guys, you have a way to compensate for that. You have a way to make up for that. It's not like your teachers aren't trying to get you to this. It's not like your teachers are trying to fail you for the subject. They want you to get to unit 8 and 9. But look at the percentage. If you forget to get to unit 9, or you don't feel as comfortable, even if a teacher doesn't get to it or they get to it, let's say you feel uncomfortable. During the pandemic years was an issue because of the timing of the courses. A lot of the classes are online. Well, it's 15 to 20% test. Study this. We have prep books that will help you. Tutoring sessions will set you up for this. You can ask your tutors, be like, hey, global change. They've talked a little bit about the disruption of the ecosystem based on different photosynthetic rates. Why is that? Is that a global change, or is that more related to Earth systems and resource unit for it? Those are discussions you can have with the tutors. So you can maximize your time. Know your average pacing. This is in general. Watch your clock. Learn to move on. Use your process elimination. I work with a lot of students that have testing anxiety. It's one of the specialties that I have. I try to eliminate any anxiety that you have within the test, because a lot of the times the anxiety that you have is within what you think about the exam. You think yourself into the wrong answer sometimes. If you're broken down to 2 answer choices, and I always say a gut feeling is something that you might have studied at some point, and scientifically proven gut feelings are real. But if you're down to 2 answer choices and you have no scientific reasoning for something, but your gut is saying like, hey, I'm down to C and D, but I really think it's C, but you have no clue. If your letter of the day is C, pick your letter of the day, move on. With that understanding, we just eliminated testing anxiety. Because even though we're trying to use the letter of the day, we're not going with our gut feeling so much. We're more going with the strategies that we use. So what I'm saying is, if you have a feeling about an answer choice, but you have no proof for the answer, use your letter of the day. Avoid your testing anxiety. Last thing I'm going to talk about is the physics exam. Now, this will be a very quick discussion because physics has a lot of breakdown of questions. You have 50 questions in total for MCQs. They're equally weighted, MCQs and FRQs, but it's a whole different type of test. This is an algebra-based exam, the physics 1 test. You have multiple choice questions that you just pick one answer for. Those are 45 questions. But then this is where students are like, seriously, they're doing this? Yes, they do this. Be so happy you know that it exists, because Imagine not knowing this happens. You'll walk into the test, select one answer, and you'll get 5 questions wrong. The multi-select questions are basically where, let's say you have answer choices A, B, C, and D. Well, you're picking maybe B and C. You might get more than 4 answer choices, by the way, but you're picking maybe B and C, more than one answer. That's a possibility, but you got to select all of them that apply. That's the issue. So with practice, there's no issue. So if you understand the test, you'll understand that's 50% of your exam weight. You have essentially it depends on the question type. That's why I said 45 seconds earlier. If you have an easy physics question, it could be 45 seconds. Same is true for bio, chem, and environmental science. But for physics, it's really like the math that can get you there. So anywhere from 45 seconds, it depends. For the easiest of all questions to about a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes to 2.5 minutes. It depends on the question type. So you guys see the variation. So anywhere from 45 seconds to 2.5 minutes, really. But the 2 to 2.5 minutes are for like the double set questions. Again, with physics tests, because there's such a broad range, you would have to see the specific test. For free response questions, you get 5 of these. And with experimental design type questions, you have, again, 2 questions worth 12 points. One is experimental design. The other one is qualitative and quantitative translation. They might give you some sort of scenario, maybe to discuss like gravitational pull, and discuss and ask you how that gravitational pull is relevant on Earth or in space. They can ask all this. The third question is about argument, short answer. So you're basically getting some sort of scenario where you have to prove something. And then questions 4 and 5 are short answer. They're 7 points each. Same with question 3. 50% of your test. Notice the physics exam, guys. This is what I mean by difficulty. Majority of students get 1. Not meant to scare anyone. It's just if you don't prep for this exam, I'm not just talking about for physics 1. I mean for all of any of the physics tests. It's one of the hardest tests in my opinion for the sciences. You need to be well aware that prep is necessary then. Notice about 6.9% of the students get 5s. Majority of the students are getting 2s and 1s. I don't want that for any of my students. I want all my students to get 5s. I say this to all my classes. So we're aiming for that 5. These are the topics that usually you get on the test. Kinematics, dynamics, circular motion, harmonic motion, linear momentum, conservation of law. You'll get work energy, centripetal motion, rotational motion, and spin. So you have different big ideas that will show up on tests. College Board likes to pick these 5 big ideas usually for physics tests. But this is only for, again, for physics 1. The reason I'm not going over the other physics exams is because we will be lecturing then for another 3 hours. So I do not mind. But those physics tests are all very stark different exams with different topics. Look at the percentage breakdown. Unit 4 is big, energy. So is unit 2, dynamics. Those are your foundational units that lead to other units. So make sure you understand those. All right, multiple choice questions. Notice the 2-pass system comes back again. Something you need to understand. Why does it exist? The now or later. Now, I don't like I said, I said this earlier in the lecture. I don't like the idea of later. So it's either now or last. The only reason we put later in the physics book is because some questions in physics are literally like later. Quite a few of them, because they're time consuming. We say it here. Time consuming questions do exist. So you guys are now well aware of the 3-pass system and the 2-pass system. So pick which one you find to your benefit and utilize them. Hopefully I've explained them well enough for you to understand. Again, there's a lot of self-analysis here. Don't do what your friends do. Don't do what your colleagues do. Don't do what you think you should do. Do what's best for you. Because sometimes what we think, like for example, I could think the 3-pass system is useful, but then I realize maybe I'm really bad at one subject matter, or maybe I'm not as strong as I need to be, or maybe I'm super confident in let's say kinematics, but I'm not so confident in rotational spin. Okay, well there's my last category. I don't want to define it as later because later means that maybe I kind of know or don't. Try to create that definitive mindset, because that will help you with not only just taking the test, but cross elimination. You're guessing. Aggressive guessing again is a big deal. You guys will notice this is a universal theme. These are from our textbooks. So overall, I hope this helps. This is my success child, success baby, success kid, success student, graduate, however you want to view this. If you ever get this in any of my lectures, you have been successful in understanding the idea of the test. I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, please let me know in the Q&A. I do have another lecture to get to, but I will answer any questions you guys have to the best of my ability. And thank you, Kara and Stephen. If you have any questions for me, let me know.
Thank you so much, Samit. This was great. I know that all of the students are so appreciative of you taking your time and sharing your expertise with all of us. Again, thank you all so much. If you have any questions either about any of these AP Sciences or where you can find tutor.com, go ahead and put that into the Q&A. We'll hang around here for a few more minutes to provide extra support to all of you. Again, thank you so much, and thank you, Samit.